I guess in the simple terms you can say it's anything that is wet, or has been wet in the past, or will be wet in the future, because many of our wetlands are seasonal, not just full of water the whole time, including the wetlands around Hyderabad and the many, many lakes here. So it's wetlands from the mountains to the sea, so it's rivers, lakes, marshes, swamps, peatlands, and coastal systems, estuaries, salt marshes, mangroves, coral reefs, seagrass beds. So the whole of the wet system that is managed through our global water cycle, and the way in which water moves around the world, evaporates, falls as rain, flows down rivers, and is available to us. And wetlands are the machinery, the natural machinery that process our water. They depend on water for their functions, but in turn we depend on them functioning for many of the crucial benefits we get from wetlands, for example in purifying water, in water for agriculture, in storm protection, in flood protection from floodplains, and so on. Many, many different roles. But we tend to have ignored those roles and to have destroyed wetlands over centuries for other purposes, because they are wastelands, cheap lands, smelly places, not realizing the huge value they actually give to us. And we have work that I've been talking about here in Hyderabad at the COP, from the TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Initiative, looking at telling us the clearer story of just how valuable these different wetland systems are.
Do we understand enough about how wetlands interact with the rest of the world's ecosystems, and is this a knowledge that we have known for a long time, or is it something that's really become apparent in the last, I don't know, couple of decades?
Well, it's been known for a long time, and essentially you can describe wetlands and rivers as the water arteries that connect our entire landscape. And when we talk about wetlands, we can't talk about them in isolation. There's no point in just saying, oh, there's a wet bit, we'll put a fence around that and protect that. Wetlands are in the landscape, and the whole Ramsar Convention approach for over 40 years now, because we're the first of the global environmental agreements, has been the whole, what CBD calls the ecosystem approach, managing our systems in a landscape context, because they're completely interconnected. And wetlands and water are the connections between all biomes, all ecosystems. A tree doesn't grow in a tropical forest unless it has the right amount of water. And many tropical forests, like the Amazon basin, are seasonally flooded wetlands, and they function as wet systems. But they're still not really fully understood, including in the CBD process. And in fact, this time when we've been talking about the role of the global water cycle in the way in which ecosystems and biodiversity maintain it, and then how the systems actually process and provide water. Even tropical forests, about 25 to 30% of their value that we can find for them is to do with managing water. Wetlands, it's not unexpectedly higher, and up to 80-95% of the value wetlands provide it with is related to water and water-related benefits.
Is there enough, you mentioned that they're often seen as waste grounds, is there enough protection? I'm assuming you're probably going to say no now, but is there enough protection of wetlands around the world, and is that understanding about their key role, are governments aware of it?
Governments are, I think, aware of it, but we are in a world where the imperatives in many parts of the world for economic growth, for poverty eradication, for improving people's livelihoods, in the short-term responses, we are tending to make decisions which are actually major trade-offs without realizing it, because, if you like, the decisions are made from one side of the coin, but not taking into account the true value of what you may be destroying in terms of what you need. And it's very hard to find any part of society or business or industry who do not depend on water being reliably available to them for one reason or another. 70% of the world's freshwater use is for irrigated agriculture, perhaps sometimes for maybe over-hungry crops in dry places. Our energy system depends on water, both for hydropower, but also for cooling water for power stations. And if there's no reliable supply of cooling water in the right amounts at the right time, our power station won't work. And I don't think the sectors of society have made those connections clearly enough to understand that essentially their business depends on our business of maintaining the character and services of wetlands. as much as our business depends on what we deliver to them. And we need to make those connections right across governments. And we're talking a lot about things called green economy now, and a move to green economy. It's still operating sectorally, and the decisions depend on how powerful each sector is. The environment sector tends to be weak in terms of its financing, its resourcing, and its positions in government, and is not making its voice loud enough, I think, in terms of what the environment provides for the business plan, the business success in the future of other sectors, is crucial. And we all have a common ground to make sure the system works for us in the future.
When we talk about climate change and look at all the projections, drinking water is right up there and one of the resources that could be most under threat. What role could wetlands play? What should we be looking for? What should we be looking to develop when we think about climate change and the provision of fresh water?
I think climate change makes all our lives just that bit more difficult in managing the systems, not least because all the predictions of the greater unpredictability of climate and the more frequent extreme events mean that traditionally water management and river basin management works on averages. We'll always have this sort of amount of water in the wet season and this in the dry. We can't rely on those sort of figures anymore, because in any one year we may get totally different amounts of water. We may get none when we expect it, or we may get far too much, and our systems, so we haven't managed our systems to handle the far too much, hence the increasing numbers of disastrous and very, very costly floods that we see around the world, including unfortunately, my home country of the UK at times.
Have we gone beyond the point of no return in terms of wetlands? You look at perhaps the UK, and there's been a lot of building in floodplains, and then people complain when their houses are flooded. Have we gone beyond the pale when it comes to building over these key aquifers and blocking off tributaries which could take those excess supplies of water that could prevent flooding?
I don't think there's ever any point of no return. We've been looking recently at any evidence for what one would call regime shift in the way systems work, and in fact there is not much evidence of irreversible change. But change and reversing what we've managed to get wrong in the past is a matter of societal choice. And the longer we leave it, and the more we do to, as you say, build on floodplains, and then be surprised when the plain floods, as it's designed naturally to do, the harder it is for societies and governments to actually make those really hard choices, to say we should remove all that infrastructure from our floodplains and let the floodplains do their job for us. The costs of doing that are huge. The costs of one small extra bit of rain in one storm event in the UK a few years ago, in direct damage to infrastructure and housing and industry, was over $5 billion US, just one event, and there's been many more since. And so it's a very hard decision if we've destroyed or damaged or put our systems in the wrong places to actually go back and reverse that. And so it's not irreversible, but it becomes more and more costly. And we do know that the costs of maintaining and managing the natural systems are far, far lower than the cost of restoring, rehabilitating them back to anything like their functions previously. Orders of magnitude higher. But we have to face doing that.
A final point, in a sense, with wetlands, man likes to feel he's in control, so we can drain this swamp, we can build this seawall, we can contain the rivers. What you're asking is for humans to actually go against their nature, because we like to dominate nature, we like to be able to think we're in control, and you're sort of asking us to go against that and let nature take its course. It's a hard ask, isn't it?
I think your phrase, we like to think we can control and dominate, is just right. And I think all the evidence we're getting, particularly with this changing and more extreme climate, is we never actually really have been. We just like to delude ourselves we can do a little bit. But we need to look at essentially saying wetlands and other ecosystems are, if you like, our natural infrastructure management systems, but they should be treated as a natural system that is essentially doing an awful lot for us for free, alongside a more constructed and managed infrastructure, and to find the right mixture of solutions. There's no one fix meets all, and going back to totally natural in a modern world is just not feasible or sensible. But to look at maximising and capitalising on those benefits of natural infrastructure they provide us with, alongside our other more constructed infrastructure management, and look for a balance between the two, because we're tending to ignore the one with the enthusiasm for concrete. And the response to Hurricane Katrina was to build the concrete walls higher to guard against another big storm surge. The most recent hurricane that went across the same area actually didn't have a big storm surge, but it dumped a huge amount of rain just inland, and they couldn't get that out because all the barriers were pointing outwards.